Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to this movement call. Um, just before we start, maybe a few reminders. If you speak English, please rename your Zoom name into EN. Put your first name and your last name. If you can see how mine appears, please do that. Secondly, we're going to have interpretation, and it's going to be in three languages. So we have English, French, and Spanish. It will be simultaneous interpretation. So to activate this, please look for the globe icon at the bottom of your screen and click on it and select English or French or Spanish, depending on what language you prefer. Another thing is to kindly mute your microphone if you're not speaking, and if possible, please be in a quiet space so we can hear you clearly. And if you have access to a headset or a microphone, please use them during the call. And because we have interpretation, I would request us to try and speak slowly so that the interpreters can capture our message. And if you're using acronyms, please spell them out fast. We just had a short video drama that was presented to us before we started the call. And it is by one of our grassroots justice network members based in Benin, and they're called the Health Access Initiative. And it shows us how women in a family setting are denied land ownership due to patriarchal systems, and which sets a scene for today's discussion on cultural norms that exclude women from decisions on land management in communities. And the link of the video has been shared in the chat, so feel free to also check that out in your free time and share amongst your network members or your contacts. So I will start, of course, by introducing myself. My name is Ruth Okara. I'm based in Nairobi, although our work spans across the country, and we also have global networks. Allow me to also talk about the grassroots justice net. This 12 grassroots justice defenders being stable. Let me know whether me at any issues, especially for issues that happen on the ground and they come together. And this is a space that brings together all those people where they can share in a safe space their own experiences and also have an opportunity to learn across the board and share knowledge. Thank you. And I will pass to Akila, who is a senior manager with the Grassroots Justice Network. And she's going to give us an overview of today's topic and what advocacy by the network on issues of gender justice on the global space looks like. So over to you, Akila.
Hi, can you all hear me okay? Yep. Okay. Great. So thank you all. My name is Akila Colisetti, and I'm a network manager with the Grassroots Justice Network team at Namati. And I just wanted to start off by giving a bit of context for this conversation and a quick recap of our engagement in the 70th Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW, which took place last month in New York. It is the principal global intergovernmental body dedicated to promoting gender equality and women's empowerment and rights. And this year, the focus theme of CSW was access to justice for all women and girls. So highly relevant to our network and the work that our members do. As a result, we joined forces with several members, FIDA Uganda, EQUIS, Justicia para las Mujeres, TEMES, and the Ugandan Ministry of Gender to host an important conversation on the topic that we're speaking about today, legal empowerment for cultural transformation. And our conversation started off by focusing on the challenging reality that we all know, even where we win laws that protect women's rights on the books, we see that in practice there's often an implementation gap. And often the barrier is in these unwritten social and cultural norms that govern gender relations in the communities that we work in. These norms we all know often dictate women should stay silent about the hardships they face. They should primarily sort of stay in the home, and in caregiving roles should not be seen in positions of leadership and governance. At the same time, we know that women's labor is often undervalued and underpaid, pushing them into sort of insecure work that widens the wage gap. And we see this very clearly, as we just saw in the video, in land, environmental, and climate work. Across the globe, we know that women are actually often the primary managers of land and resources, yet they are systematically excluded from the decisions that govern them. And even when there are laws granting women the right to own, title, inherit land, these are often very difficult to implement given these sort of patriarchal, cultural, and social norms, where decisions about land are often really still seen as the domain of men. And not only that, when women are shouldering sort of the vast majority of unpaid care work and household responsibilities, this can act as a physical barrier to their participation, limiting their time, their ability to engage in community land meetings, negotiations, trainings, educational opportunities, and really widening the gap in leadership and decision making around land. So the session that we had last month highlighted the important role of legal empowerment in really responding to this challenge and being able to transform these cultural norms. And we talked about this at several levels. First, the personal transformation. We often see that legal empowerment through simple know your rights sessions, education, helps women to often see that they are subjects of rights, often for the first time. And that shift in identity is often the first step towards greater leadership and towards transforming these broader norms. Then we go to the family level. Legal empowerment can give women and men the tools to think about the private sphere at the household level, redistributing care work and household chores so that women actually have the time and the agency to realize their right to participate in community affairs, to lead. Then moving to the community level, we see many grassroots legal empowerment organizations really doing very important work of engaging not only women and girls, but men and boys and traditional leaders, religious leaders, bringing these diverse alliances on board and working together as partners to align local practices with human rights and women's rights principles. And by bringing these diverse actors on board, we can really start to see those changes at the community level to normalize women's rights leadership. And then finally, collective power, moving beyond the community often to society-wide shifts. Legal empowerment can really bring women and allies together in collective, build solidarity, and create the space to mobilize and organize together, not just to change one household, but to really shift the norms in the community and change the narrative about what is possible. So to wrap up, the message from our side event was clear. If we want to strengthen women's access to justice, put laws around women's rights in land, environment into practice, we need to address these underlying patriarchal norms around gender and build strong, diverse alliances and movements to do so. So legal empowerment, I think, we shared many strategies for cultural transformation, for shifting these power dynamics and opening up space for women's leadership. And I'm excited to dive in deeper today to hear more strategies from the legal empowerment strategies on the ground to accelerate the cultural transformation and create real change on women's rights in the land, environmental, climate space. So thank you all, and very much looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you so much, Akila. My apologies. My internet was not that stable, and I'm still getting that notification. In case it's really bad, then I'll need to move to probably another room. Just a few housekeeping rules. Kindly rename yourselves if you can. If you speak English or you speak French or Spanish, starts with EN if you speak English, just as I have. If you speak Spanish, ES, and if you speak French, rename with FR as a prefix to your name. Also in the chat, I acknowledge we are many in this call. Kindly introduce yourself and which organization you work with, and we'd like to know who's in the room today. At this point, I will have us do a poll. So if you can share the poll, and then it's going to set the pace for us today. Yes, and there it is. The question is, how familiar are you with legal empowerment? You can just take the next 15 or 30 seconds to answer the poll. So I'll share the results in the next 2 seconds. It's only 5 people who've answered. If we could just quickly give our opinion on how familiar you are with legal empowerment, and then we can proceed. Okay. Michael, are you able to? Yes, thank you. So we've shared the poll again. So we're just going to take the next 5 seconds. For those who I'm saying 50% of us have answered. So probably another 20 seconds so that whoever wants to give their answer can do that. So this are the results of the poll. 46% are very familiar with legal empowerment, and 46%, 4% are not familiar at all, and 46% are somewhat familiar with legal empowerment. So those are the results of the poll. So probably we'll have the next question. Okay. All right. So the next question was, there needs to be legal empowerment before cultural transformation. And 83% say yes, there needs to be legal empowerment before cultural transformation. And 17% disagree. And I think these results are very interesting, and we'll have a discussion on that because we have a very interesting panel of speakers. Before I introduce them, I'd just like to mention a few activities that we do in Namati, Kenya, to encourage cultural transformation for gender transformative leadership. We have what we call community lands in Kenya, and those are the vast majority of the lands in Kenya. And unfortunately, most of them are under indigenous tenure systems, which are not registered. The law exists. We have the Community Land Act, and it requires that all these community lands are registered. And traditionally, women, especially on those parts of the country, have not been included. We have these lands in the arid and semi-arid areas, mainly where they practice pastoralism. So what has happened in the last 10 years is that the law has enabled for those communities which have had those systems work for them and they're trying to get their lands registered. We have community land management committees in which a third of which are supposed to be women, or not less than a third are supposed to be women. So in that sense, we have women coming into leadership where they're not familiar with those kinds of spaces, and culture has really silenced them. In Namati, Kenya, we have done what we call leadership boot camps for these women, where we bring on board these women to discuss their issues, their challenges, all in a safe space. And in this sense, we've seen a lot of transformation. We've seen them going back to their communities to empower other women who are also in leadership spaces or are trying to come into leadership. We acknowledge that it's quite a challenge, especially where the communities are in the farthest parts of this country. It's hard to access them. Sometimes, depending on the season, it's tough to get pastoralists, nomadic pastoralists in one room, but we've managed to train at least 200 women in the last 3 years. So that's one thing that I wanted to share. And that's how we have tried to loop in cultural transformation in the women we're trying to empower. So I think we are up for the next set of speakers, and I will just do an introduction of each of them before they all start speaking. And I'll start with Fariha. Fariha is from Bangladesh. And just before she speaks, I'd like us to know that she's a committed women's rights activist, and she has experience working with marginalized communities. And she currently works for Badabon Sango. I hope I got the correct pronunciation there, where she supports programs on women land rights, women fisher folks, and women in agriculture. She has quite an extensive CV, and over the years, she's advocated for the rights of migrant workers, GBV survivors, and promoting their participation in decision making and fair access. And she's going to share with us today on a few things. She's going to start talking to us about what she's seen in her community, in her own experience, and what challenges there are. So without further ado, I'll welcome her. But let me just introduce also Farida Aliwa from Natural Justice. She's the Executive Director of Natural Justice. Farida Aliwa is also known to be a bold leader in challenging and reshaping the social and institutional barriers that limit women participation. And she's also going to talk about her own experiences working in the southern parts of Africa. And she has quite extensive experiences also in issues around cultural transformation. And then our last speaker is going to be Zonia Zacarias. She's from Guatemala, and she's also a founding member of the Council of Indigenous Women and Biodiversity. And that brings together 18 grassroots Indigenous women's organizations. And for the past 2 decades, she's been involved in defending individual and collective rights of women and Indigenous people. So without further ado, let me introduce Fariha to share with us her own experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth, and hello, everyone. This is Farah Jasmine. My introduction has already been given excellently by Ruth. So I would like to talk about and I'd like to share about a story, a coastal community of the southern Bangladesh where Badamashanghu works. So I would like to share a story about a woman who is also a fighter. Her name is Safara Begum, which clearly demonstrate how legal empowerment can shift both individual outcomes and community norms around the women's rights. So the story begins on the Safara Begum, who is a widow. So after her husband's death, returned to her father's household with a young son. So although under inheritance law, she had a legal and a clear entitlement to her father's property, in practical, her rights were not recognized or protected with the family system. Her brother exercised informal control over her land and began systematically denying her access. This escalates from verbal intimidation to attempted evictions, restrictions of her mobility within the households or the homestead where she lives, and also interference with her regular livelihoods. She has a small tea stall, which her livelihood depends on. He also imposed a legal narrative at the household levels and also the tea stall, repeatedly challenging her to prove her rights, knowing that she had limited access to documentations and legal knowledge. So the sufferer's case came to light through a community legal empowered mechanism led by one of our trained paralegal volunteers. So the entry point was not a formal complaint. It was an ongoing community engagement through our regular courtyard meetings. These spaces act as an informal place where the women safely can share about their problems without going directly into the formal legal systems, which are often difficult and expensive and also intimidating for them. So the paralegal volunteer found Safara by observing her during the regular courtyard meetings and slowly building trust with her. Instead of directly asking questions to her, she followed a careful approach on the legal empowerment, keeping it confidential, letting Safara decide when to share and gradually helping her to feel more confident. So over time, Safara moved from just not listening quietly, but opening and sharing her problems about her land and the legal insecurities. So once the case was disclosed, the interventions followed a legal structure empowered pathways. Safara was helped to understand her legal rights to inherit property under the national law. So this was important because it changed how she saw her situation. From just family problems to legal rights issues, she could formally claim on and act on. So the paralegal volunteer assisted her in identifying the available evidences such as the family records, the land informations, and the inheritance links to strengthen her legal standing. So before taking any formal steps, the paralegal helped arrange and structure discussions with the family. They tried to resolve the issues at the community level first, while they are also clearly explaining the sufferer's legal rights during the process. So when the informal solutions did not work, sufferer was referred to one of Badamu Shongu's panel lawyer. So this provides her with proper legal evidences and confirmed her to claim her land under the law and helped her prepare a formal legal steps. So with the paralegal accompaniment, Safara engaged with relevant local dispute resolution structures and began asserting her claim within a formal legal pathways, reducing the isolation and increasing the procedural confidences. This integrated model ensures the continuity between the community-based support and our formal justice systems. a core principles for the legal empowerment. So as a result, Safara was able to resist eviction attempts and formally assert her inheritance rights over the land. However, the broader aspects is a systematic and normative. At the individual level, Safara transitioned from legal invisibility to legal agency. She is now actively participating in the community dialogues and has become a peer resource for other women who is facing the similar disputes or the issues from the family for claiming the land. So, women at the community level, we are observing an important cultural and a social shifts also. So, what is actually happening in other women's life is that women are increasingly framing inheritance disputes as enforceable legal rights rather than a private family matters. There is a growth willingness to engage with documentations, lawyers, and formal systems. Informal power structures with families are being challenged through the right-based awareness approach. And critically, paralegal volunteers are emerging as recognized community level legal intermediaries, bridging the gap between the marginalized women and a formal legal institutions. So in this case, legal empowerment is not just about a case resolution. It is also about building the legal capacity at the community level, strengthening the referral ecosystems, and gradually transforming gender power relations around land and inheritance. This also showed us that how the legal documentation literacy and the land documentation literacy is very important in the grassroots level, which has introduced us with a new and the approach to train the women grassroots level as well as the paralegal volunteers about the basic land right documentations and what need to be done if the person she's depending like husband or father passes away and what he or she has to do legally. So the basic concept need to be introduced, which by our paralegal experts and the panel lawyers are giving them a proper training, like a residential training or 2 or 3 days training to make them understand the basic concepts of the land rights and the literacy. That how without worrying about not having the land, she can have the access to the land and how she can go to the community or the legal empowerment systems to claim about her land or to just start the process without worrying about it. So this is all about, I want to share a cultural transformation in the lens of legal empowerment strategies from the grassroots level of Bangladesh. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Fariha. That was quite a nice story to hear of a woman who was basically at her wit's ends in terms of what she could do to help her protect her inheritance. And, it's just interesting to hear about her journey and what she is doing today for other women or other people who need that type of support. So, and I just want to ask other participants to just type in your questions, or you can raise your hand and ask any questions to Fariha. And probably just, I would just like to point out some things that have struck a chord with me, having worked with women at the margins. You've mentioned literacy and how that's a challenge. It is a challenge, really, especially when you're talking about, when they need to know the law and they need to be familiar with the legal documents that could assist them claim those rights that they deserve and are theirs. Just how do you expand that shadow of women who can actually be literate enough? Do you go out to enrich those referral pathways by perhaps speaking to women who are more literate? Or how do you expand that shadow so that literacy does not become a hindrance as it is in very many parts of the world?
Yeah, it's also and a process of encouraging them, showing them the examples of the other women who are doing great in understanding that land literacy. Like in very, it's an effective way through introduce them in the courtyard meetings, which is more formal, friendly, not formal, I mean friendly and safe environment for them, and sharing the other stories of the woman who has given, who has claimed the lands or maybe go to the court or maybe in illegal systems by themselves just to claim the lands, showing example, giving them the example, the transformative stories of other women from the grassroots level, which gives them an empowerment feelings or understanding that yes, I might need to understand these land literacy process for my future as well. And also introducing them to lawyers, the female lawyers, paralegals, how they are working, and the success stories in claiming the lands is also and giving them the boost of the confidence for them to learn about the process, and maybe not forcing them, but telling them to come to the trainings to see how the other participants are doing, which might give them some confidence to learn.
Very well. I will welcome Monica if you can unmute and ask your question. Fariha is here. Thank you, Monica. Very good question. Maybe Fariha, you can answer that in 1 minute, and then we can move to the next speaker. But if you have any other questions, she's here and she can type out her answers as much as she can in the chat. So, Fariha.
Thank you, Monica, for the question. So I'll be very short. One thing that stays with them is the understanding and the learning. Sometimes giving them the input supports or maybe some short-term supports doesn't go on a long run. But the trainings, the sessions, the understandings, and giving them the literacy, documentations, properly guiding them will always be a support in the and in the long run, the sustainability. Giving them the landscape training, the agriculture training, saline tolerant training, or maybe other like how to claim their different kind of ID cards and maybe other documentations, learning process will stay them even the project duration is ended. So focusing on the trainings will give them a long run support, even though the project is no longer, or maybe us are no longer working with them.
Thank you so much, Fariha, and for the question. So I will now move on to Farida from Natural Justice. She will talk about her experiences in West and South Africa and how her work has supported cultural transformation and how that's playing out and how things are going. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to join the call today and have Faria go before me so we don't confuse the people and the names. But thank you. I think this is quite critical for us as natural justice. We focus on community-led legal empowerment, working from and within systems, and not really imposing from the outside. So building off the first presentation and the experiences shared, I think it's critical to harness what we have within our community paralegal networks and our approach. We do embed that within communities to build legal literacy. And we've seen that this has led to confidence and visibility. Whether it shifts norms is extremely important, and it's part of our work. Whenever I've traveled to the communities that we work with in South Africa or even in Senegal, most recently when I was in Madagascar as well, it was extremely empowering to see that women were leading a lot of the community-led action and advocacy around extractives, around climate injustice, around degradation. And this is where we've seen the impact of the legal literacy or the legal empowerment, especially at the community level. But what's very key to our approach is that these community legal officers, as we would call them, are trained by natural justice, but they're community members. They are part of us, they're part of the organization, so they come with the background of the organization, but they are community members. So the work is really being able to identify who these female community members are, who can then have the opportunity to build their own legal literacy and then work with their community to shift these norms from the inside. What we've seen is that enables women to move into decision-making spaces, whether they are land committees or conservancies or even leading, as I said, like in Madagascar, community management systems that protect forests, protect land. And this is this creates that opportunity to bring about that change. Their role in mobilizing then rural, and local communities. They are the ones who, most recently in a study that we also did around environmental climate defenders, we note that women are the first who are exposed to not only climate injustice, but the effects of climate change because of their role in society. And they're also the first who can expose what's happening within the environment, whether it's pollution, whether it's development projects that are influencing or affecting our communities, our lands, and importantly, health outcomes as well. Traditionally, women are caregivers, so they are closer to understanding the health of children or the community at large. And this actually puts them in positions where they can actually influence change. But it also is the proximity of whether they can have spaces to share what they know or influence decision making. So we've really seen that the more that we can empower women, the more they can be central in these community legal officer roles or community legal positions, then that creates trust. It creates a visible role model for others in the community, whether it's women or young girls, to see that they can influence change. And then there's also the aspect of cultural understanding. We've heard from the previous speaker that literacy is an issue when it comes to ability of women to influence decision making. However, the approaches that we've taken are embedded into culture, embedded into understanding, cultural norms and in local language. So the beauty of this approach is that it's embedded in community, but brings that understanding of the law, brings that understanding of opportunities to influence law and policy. And it's really a power building approach that we've tried to use, and it has worked. It has led to women speaking, women being heard in community forums, the increased recognition of women's land and resource rights, especially in places like Kenya. But as I said, women in formal leadership and governance roles, whether they're community management models for conservation of forests and oceans. For those who know a little bit about our work at Natural Justice, we do also use strategic litigation to protect and to stop environmental injustice. And one of our our biggest impact cases have been on the Wild Coast in South Africa. Until to date, women have played such an instrumental role in that advocacy. We worked with them on the legal knowledge and legal education. And that also, you could see that it became a tool for shifting power and culture and just not accessing rights. Women were, through that advocacy, were aware, they formed better within themselves. That led to other opportunities, economic opportunities as well, and visibly centered women in the governance of their own community. That said, it's not an easy shift, and it's not one that isn't seen with resistance. And so the question around whether it's legal empowerment first and then cultural shifts is a difficult one to answer, because the cultural transformation can lead to better opportunities for women. The legal empowerment can also lead to better outcomes for women, and it probably needs to work hand in hand. Women also experience different cases of violence, especially in the advocacy space. This is not only, gender-based violence, a lot of smear campaigns, a lot of resistance from the community themselves. And this is one of the biggest limiting factors when it comes to legal empowerment. So what we have done is to ensure that we can provide as much protection for environmental defenders, and especially women environmental defenders in the space. Our Defenders Fund provides a rapid response for environmental defenders. And very recently, through a research that we've done, we're looking at building specific support mechanisms for women who are at the forefront of protection and environmental defense.
Thank you so much, Farida. Yes, that pronunciation, I had to just get it right. Very well put. And I think one thing that's encouraging to hear is the fact that women are at the forefront in leading change, and in those local communities that you have worked extensively with, and their embeddedness in the community is an asset, because then there is buy-in in what they do and in the leadership they bring, with the familiarity with the society around, but also highlighting that it's not an easy shift from what was to what is better and what we are trying to achieve. So, I mean, if you have issues of violence, it definitely makes it harder for women to just get in there and just be full throttle in just fighting for all these issues that you've mentioned, climate change and extractive industries and development projects, which, hinder progress or take away some rights. So it's good to hear that. I don't know whether there's any question which our audience has, but one thing that maybe I could ask is how do you think networks and partners working in that space could scale up and come together to just make sure that there is progress in just the achievements that we seek to have,
Yeah,
either
thank you. Maybe
globally or regionally? Yes, thank you.
I think for me, it is not necessarily about replication. I think even in the sector itself, there was a time where we thought scale equals replication. So what has worked one place will work in another. And we know that, from a human rights approach, it's how we can take what's worked and then be able to localize and adapt where in other communities. So for me, this approach has worked because it is a bottom-up approach. It's different actors playing different roles from the grassroots level, where that legitimacy is created through those lived experience and driving that change. However, that needs amplification. If we think about the amount of work that we put in to bring about changes when women issues are at the center of it, we also know that requires a lot more resources than anything else. Not only do we need laws that prevent, we also need laws that protect. And so that in that case, collective strength is extremely important. We need that grassroots legitimacy and lived experience. We need NGOs that are working within the sector on legal tools and technical support, and the amplification is really around linking those community voices to policy and to global spaces. We have to place more importance on how we amplify into these spaces and whether we're shaping agenda, especially at the regional level, because that's where those shared experiences can then be further amplified. And I see that we still need to do more, especially at the regional level. We need to do more at the African level so that it's a consolidated voice that can feed into global influence and lift that from participation, lift it from attending, lift it from a checkbox exercise to
Okay.
really agenda setting power.
Thank you so much. And I think what you highlight is quite important. It's not always about skill, it's about the results and the little incremental efforts that make a big impact at the end of the day. I don't know whether we have time for a call-in for someone to ask a question. I see Itanan, you have your hand up. If you could ask your question maybe in 1 minute, and then we can have a very short answer to that. But if you have any other questions, this is to everyone on the call. Type your questions, and then we can always try and answer them. So, Ita, if you can speak.
Sorry, Ruth, did you want me to go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think because of time, I think I'll start from the second question and finish with the protection of environmental defenders. But I think that's the broader question in terms of how we are working within the community to shift those cultural norms, how we're also engaging with men and boys to understand the cultural shifts that need to change. And I think that is a much a larger process and goes back to the question that we were asked at the beginning, does legal empowerment lead to cultural transformation or the other way around? And my view is that it has to be parallel to ensure that women are not still they're in a position of power, but they can still be affected by retaliation. And that's why ensuring that there's support, especially for female environmental defenders, is critical, where systems are in place to respond, where, in this case example, they are under attack and that attack looks very different. The female experience and the woman experience of an environmental defender is also very different from that of a male defender. So there also needs to be a balance in terms of working on law and policy, protection policy for environmental defenders, but at the same time, what we have done is to ensure that our defenders initiative then is able to support women defenders with legal expertise, advice, and also medical relocation. Those services need to be there when we're working in this space. And I hope they are there for the women who have been arrested.
Thank you very much. I think there's another question, but I will ask that we have the third speaker come in, and then Anjay, you'll have your question later after we finish with the third speaker. So at this point, allow me to welcome Zonia to also share with us her own experience. So Zonia, welcome.
Good morning to everyone here, and thank you very much for the invitation. As they've already said, I form part of the Council of Indigenous Women and Biodiversity here in Guatemala in Central America. Today, I'd like to share with you an experience that has to do with a working alliance that we have with the movement of communities that defend water, called Canachot. Together, we have been carrying out this working alliance at a territorial level. There are two developments that bring us together. They are struggle and resistance, essential themes at a territorial level that have to do with the impact of a hydroelectric plant that has been developed throughout our territory. Just to situate ourselves, these projects are located in the transversal area of the north. Specifically, this is an area where palm oil is being raised. Large territorial extensions have been occupied through the purchase of land from communities and other strategies. And this brings us to what we should talk about today, which is the life story of one of our companions. In this case, I'd like to focus on how the internal norms of the communities, the issue of the patriarchy and machoism or sexism in our communities colors our struggle and how we confront that. Palm oil has generated, as you know, a lot of conflict within the communities. There's been a loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services, specifically related to water. Faced with this situation, this companion of ours, Maria Chok, first, she resisted within the community because she did not want to sell her land. We know that for indigenous communities, land is a very essential asset. So what have the companies done? The monoculture companies, what have they done? They've made a semi-obligatory purchase of these lands. There are many communities that have abandoned their land and their territory due to these practices. In this case, our companion has resisted. She did not want to sell her lands. Another element that we should identify here, another one of the strategies that the corporation uses is to divide the community. In this case, we know the situation of poverty and extreme poverty that these communities face. And these corporations have used that to undervalue the land and incentivizing these communities to sell their land. This means that some members of the community sell their land, and when they see that others who live there do not want to sell, they align themselves with the corporation and begin to pressure others to sell their lands. So this companion of ours, first she resisted the sale of the land, and then she resisted those members of her own community that were aligned with the palm oil corporations. Within the public administration, to bring development to the communities, they do this through councils of community development. That's what they're called here in Guatemala. And this is an organization established within the community which manages development projects. These leaders also began to put pressure upon this companion, forcing her or trying to force her to sell her land to the corporation. Another key element that we've seen in this is that there's a pattern, a cultural pattern that is patriarchal and sexist, as others have said. There are norms that affect women specifically. In this case, women are not considered full holders of rights. Rather, those who make decisions about whether the land is sold or not are men, because the women are, in many cases, are not the owners of the land. Although in this case, our companion was the owner of her land. Those who have a voice in councils very often are men. And we found that within the movement, we see these patriarchal and sexist features. They very often don't allow women's leadership to arise. So this is another question that we see. This is another reason why women are often not supported in their struggles. Another question we've seen has been the accompaniment of public institutions, specifically in Guatemala. We have an organization called the Office for the Defense of the Indigenous Women. There's another office against discrimination, but these are centered in the city and the capital. And very often they're very remote from these communities and the specific cases that arise in these communities. So our companions, well, very often as an organization, we have accompanied them. What kind of strategy have we developed to do this? Well, faced with this kind of situation, we understand that changes are progressive. They don't come from one day to the next. Together with the movement, we've established a exchange of experiences and solidarity with women defenders from other territories. Our platform operates at a national level. We work with various different levels of defenders. So what we've tried to do is to generate exchanges and solidarity with them. In this way, we have been able to accompany struggles throughout the territory, generating bonds of solidarity. Another thing we've done is training about individual and collective rights for Indigenous women. We Indigenous women, we very often don't focus on individual rights, but rather on collective rights. In this case, we've identified that within Indigenous movements and peasant movements, what we've often seen is that the demands very often don't take the issues of women into account. They focus on collective rights, but don't differentiate women. So we've been working to raise awareness within this movement to make this differentiation and have a gender approach. What have we achieved in this regard? Well, we've worked out a agenda specifically for women or about women. We've achieved an increased participation by women and voice, and to some extent, women have gained terrain in decision making. Also, leading some of the denunciation, some of the processes, we're looking more towards women and seeing women on the front lines of the struggle. They've always been there, but until now they've been invisibilized. And I think this has been a big part of our work, as well as the work of other organizations that are working on this. We've also achieved collective empowerment regarding environmental and territorial rights. Another important point has been that within the cultural rights, people are often reluctant to talk about gender because it's closely linked. People assume that if you're talking about this issue, you're a radical, you're a homosexual. And there we see that there's a lot of reluctance to talk about gender-related issues. We've been working on this, and we've taken up a lot of the elements of the Indigenous cosmic vision that starts from duality, complementarity, in order to work how we're going to reduce the inequality in participation. I think sometimes within our communities, the issue of gender is very sensitive. Sometimes as soon as you say gender, you're only working with women. And pushing forward this cultural transformation is very important, both for men and for women. But very often, the projects we have to train, projects focus on training women. But the issue is rooted in something essential. These transformations have to include men and women. So I think we need a transformative, holistic, integrated vision in which both men and women participate in these processes. For me, Sonia Zacarias, the fact of being within a transformation, the transformation of local norms, to be able to talk about a legal empowerment in a strong sense. Everything goes hand in hand with everything else. This has a key role in our territory, and we have to look at how all of these situations are addressed. I do believe it's important. And as part of an organization, a national platform, we believe that it's very important. We, as an organization, we don't think of ourselves as feminist, although we do see that feminism serves to transform realities at a local and a global level. But we appeal to our indigenous cosmovision, which also has elements that can help us to reduce inequalities, these inequalities that women confront within our territory. So this is one way to speak. We can also speak about, when we speak about indigenous peoples, we have to talk about how this can lead to a collective transformation. That's what I would like to share with you this morning or night or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. But thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Zonia. It was very interesting listening to that story about one woman's struggle with the powers that be in just, protecting her land from being sold out. I think another thing that also comes out clearly is the impact of poverty on just securing community rights, and in particular, women who face more dangers when they're trying to fight for their rights. You mentioned that even the community pressured her to sell because it was aligning with the committee that was aligned with the investors. So I think some of those things, as they come out, things we can relate to, even in our own struggles locally, to empower communities, because poverty is such a powerful factor, and it's used against communities most of the times. So just to summarize what you've said, you've talked about just, the way, cultural patterns and patriarchal systems exist, and they impact women's struggles in a negative way, especially when it comes to community land rights and, protecting their own individual rights, whether that's property or their own personal rights. You've talked about some of the strategies that can be used. There's exchanges where there's knowledge sharing and women have safe spaces to talk about these issues. You've talked about women being part of networks, whether locally or even regionally or globally, if it comes to that, where there is even more engagement and more sharing, and that you're just not fighting alone. You said you don't see yourself as an individual or your organization as an individual. You see it as part of a global transformative movement that's driving change in a collective sense. And that, women have now become decision makers because of that work and the effort that is being put to just bring about all these changes that we all need to secure the rights that we're talking about. And also, I think one major takeaway is that we don't need to discard all our indigenous beliefs and things we believe in, because those also are putting women in a space where they're being respected, that they're being seen, and that you can work with that and not just fear being branded a feminist because you're using your own indigenous beliefs and value systems that are supporting women come into these spaces of power and decision making. So thank you so much for sharing. I think I want to open the floor to some questions. If anyone has questions, please put your hand up. I know that Joseph, you had your hand up from the previous session. I don't know whether that's it's still there, or you have had your question answered, maybe in the chat. But if you want to ask your question, please feel free. You can unmute and ask. Thank you. Thank you so much, Joseph, for that contribution. I hear you and the work that you're doing to empower women, particularly just making them build agency when it comes to fighting for their rights. And your question is, how can we expand? And I think in the sense that how can we have more resources to fight for those rights? So I think we will take note of your question. There's Andre, I don't know whether you're still in the call. Your hand was up from the previous time, just after our second speaker. I don't want to lock you out. If you're still on the call, please feel free to unmute and ask your question. Anjay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you again. Well done. Job well executed. I just have a very direct question. We all witness what women go through. By the way, I work with the London Equity Movement, a land rights organization in Uganda. We interface with a lot of things that women go through. We talk about labor being undervalued, exclusion from decisions, and so many other things. So the Grassroots Justice Network, I kept asking myself, how would you love the collective space to look like, especially looking at the 3 dimensions of land, environment, and the climate aspect? From the panelists, how would we work around this to ensure that we deal with these injustices squarely but also orderly? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. I think I'll take a question also from Sonia Perez, and before I invite the speakers. So Sonia, if you can unmute, I'll take your question and then I'll invite the speakers.
Yes. I think that one of the questions that specifically the last question that you asked about how women and girls can have more transformative actions. I consider that with regard that legal empowerment has to go hand in hand, not only with access to justice in environmental questions, but also social justice. Transformations, in this case, according to my criteria, there's one that we've been working on, and here I'm speaking from what we've been working on. Empowerment demands access to the right to a better life, a holistic vision, not just a matter of environmental justice or climate justice, but rather a justice in which girls and women have opportunities for equality, not only in environmental issues, but also throughout their lives. And that requires an approach. It's true that we, the organizations that accompany community and grassroots organizations, we seek that the women leaders demand public policies in their territories because we are not excluded from these structures of the state. I believe that legal empowerment should lead women to demanding holistic rights, not only environmental ones, but also sexual and reproductive rights. So as an organization, we are also pushing in this direction. At the end of the day, these leaders, these companions, these defenders, that they be able to achieve a good life, this good living that we seek. And this is complex because, as someone else said, how to do many actions, we need international cooperation when it should be obligatory that the nation state respond through public policy to these issues. And if they don't, then it's an uphill battle because we're continually seeking funding to do this work when really this should be a obligation of the national state. So empowerment isn't just to do with environmental justice or with a specific agenda that we're trying to fulfill. It should transcend that. The question is, how do we generate this kind of historical memory, this critical consciousness? So empowerment, from my perspective, is not just a matter of how do we exercise our rights in a legal situation, how do we appeal to the law? Rather, it has to do with a transformation of a whole way of thinking and understanding what it means to have access to justice.
Thank you so much, Zonia. I think we can have Farida and Fariha this time to just answer, because the questions are quite many, and I think I'll just, because of time, just allow them 1 minute to just share what, in their opinion, has been the most effective method of shifting cultural practices that affect women. And I think we can still have these discussions in the Grassroots Justice Network platforms around how to empower ourselves, if it's matters of resources and learning. I think the space doesn't end here, and I think we'll have announcements as to how we can continually have these conversations. So just very briefly, either Farida or Fariha, you can answer that question.
Does Faria want to go first, or should I?
Please do.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, I think thank you very much for the questions and for the contributions. I think for me, as I said before, I'm not sure if there is a single model. However, I would say that the approaches are important. We've even heard from the experiences here where it's community-led and embedded in local realities, but also women, empowered first, and then be able to provide that peer support. So our paralegal approach, as we would call it, but really the community legal offices that we have, then provide that model of intentionally investing in women and creating both access to justice and pathway. That in one way will empower, oh, sorry, I don't have my video on. That will empower women. However, as I said, also ensuring that, we're engaging with men and boys, and also being able to shift their understanding of the women's role in communities and how that needs to shift. So the empowerment and the balance of cultural transformation is something that for me would be the model to approach to ensure that we actually have that cultural transformation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think that just gives a very good summary of how that can happen. And I just want to thank you so much, all our speakers, for that. I think I would want to invite Anne at this point to give some announcements before we go to the next session.
Thank you, Ruth. So I'm going to share two announcements. So one is on a report that was developed by members of the Grassroots Justice Network based in Latin America. So that is ACIJ from Argentina, FIMA from Chile, and ProDesk from Mexico. And so these members led participatory action research processes along with urban, indigenous, and rural communities. And then drawing from these experiences, they developed this report that presents several lessons, including lessons that highlight the central role of women in defending their territories to advance a deeper, more democratic form of environmental justice. So you will see the QR code to scan the report to dive deep into this subject, which is some of the things that we have been discussing on this call, and it is available in English and Spanish. The second thing is to share other opportunities that we have for future peer learning. So next month in May, we are launching a flagship program for the Grassroots Justice Network Academy, which is a world-class institute and learning community focused on strengthening the work of grassroots justice defenders. So maybe some of you may have applied to the program, and we may be having some of you joining the program, which is going to be starting in May. And in case you'd love to get more information on this on other offerings within the academy, we'd really encourage you to sign up as Grassroots Justice Network members, which we're going to talk about shortly. And then in June 22nd, 2026, we are launching an introduction to carbon justice course, which is a self-guided course that offers foundational information on carbon markets. So to understand how carbon markets work, the risks and opportunities for communities, but also how core principles of carbon justice can be brought to life in either carbon project agreements, national legislation, and global policy forums. So we'd really encourage you, if you're not a member of the Grassroots Justice Network, there is a WhatsApp group link that's going to be pasted on the chat, and then also the website of the Grassroots Justice Network, where you can click and then join to be a member of the network, so that you may be informed when this offering goes live, but also when other opportunities within the Grassroots Justice Network Academy come up. And it's also a platform to be able to connect and learn with other network members and even come together to have collective action. So yeah, that's it from me. I'll hand it over back to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Anne. There is so much to learn and a lot more planned for all of us within the network. So I'll just encourage us to join the groups, especially where you're working in areas of that line, carbon and land environment protection. So kindly download the resources where you can and have a look at them. So I'd like to just thank you all for joining this call today. And I wish you all a great evening, a great day, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, and everyone.
Thank you.